So I just wanted to remind folks of that. Perfect. A few other things before we just jump right in. We have a lot to get to today, so I'll move through this introductory message quickly. So I want to acknowledge some of the conversations that went on last week about our engagement processes moving forward. So we have heard from some of you that there is a desire to move towards a more hybrid or in-person approach for these types of meetings. So I want to flag that we hear you. We are exploring next steps, and we will be sending out a survey to all of you to better evaluate the broader group's needs. So I wanted to flag that and let you all know to be on the lookout for that survey. And the gist of the survey will just be to kind of evaluate what you are looking for in terms of policy engagement meetings moving forward, and how we can be accommodating to your needs. So I'll flag that. The next piece that I will flag is that at our last meeting, we received feedback that there was a desire for a separate update on 2021 implementation projects, opposed to lumping it together with this meeting. So I just do want to flag that while we don't have that as an agenda item today, we are in the process of getting that meeting scheduled. So also be on the lookout for that meeting invite. So in terms of what we have on the agenda today, as I mentioned, we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to move pretty quickly. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to start with that large agency POP narrative spreadsheet that was sent out last week. It's also posted on our website. I will be sharing my screen, so we'll move along together. What we're basically going to do is we're going to have each essentially POP sponsor from the agency give a short overview of the proposal, and then we'll pause for questions and comments. I will note that because we have so many POPs, we're going to move pretty quickly, and we don't necessarily have all the time in the world to discuss every single POP. So I would encourage you to raise your hand and unmute yourself when it's time. So *6 to raise your hand if you're on the phone, and *9 to unmute yourself, or the other way around. I can't quite remember, but the first person will figure out what it is. And I also encourage you to use the chat. I will be monitoring the chat, and I will be taking those comments and putting those in my notes to make sure that they're all captured. So if we don't get to your comment or question, it'll be in the chat, and I'll be sure to capture it. And so after we get through the POPs, hopefully we can get through all of them. We will be giving a quick update on the LCs, the split season leasing LC and the water planning LC, and sort of next steps for both of those. And then a quick wrap up of how we would like to move forward in terms of getting your feedback on prioritization for our POPs. So that's how we'll finish up the meeting. And hopefully we'll finish right on time with 3 hours. So with that, I will pause. Tom, Raquel, would you all like to add anything before we go ahead and get started?
Thanks, Bryn. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's important for us to have a chance to get your feedback and input and thoughts. So I encourage you to weigh in along the way, and also encourage folks. We've got a long stretch of time. We don't have breaks set in there in the agenda, I believe. So take the time that you need to stretch your legs or take breaks. We totally understand.
Thank you for that. And I'll just remind folks that we are recording, and that we have enabled the chat today for efficiency purposes. And so just remember that those are both this meeting recording as well as the chats in the chat box are public records and subject to public records requests. And I would encourage folks, in the interest of time, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring those, so that way we can move quickly through the POPs, and also make sure that we're hearing from all of you in terms of questions that you may have. So thank you all for being here. And of course, if you need to, please also use the hand raise function. So thank you.
Great. All right, so I think we should just get right into it. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm sharing the correct screen. So can we all see the spreadsheet? I know that the text is a little bit small. So I can either keep it small and scroll, or we can zoom in and then move the cursor back and forth. I just don't want to give people motion sickness. So if there are any preferences, go ahead and drop it in the chat and I can adjust. But with that, I say we just go ahead and get started. And I believe reference pop A, which is climate and drought. Raquel, that is you. So go ahead and kick us off.
Bryn, why don't you go ahead and hide column D, and that will hopefully make it, and then zoom in.
There we go.
So folks won't be able to see. Everyone has the spreadsheet, so they should be able to. And then maybe go ahead and hide the title or the topics, one of those, just to everyone can reference the alphabet, and that will let you zoom in a bit more for folks. Okay. So this first policy option package, and our goal here is we're not going to go in a bunch of detail since you have the detail in front of you, but we will touch on each one at a high level. And so this policy option package, some of you may see some familiar items in it because we've been talking about drought for quite a while now and water scarcity. And some of these items have also, or were also included in either the IWRS or the Drought Task Force report. So you'll see some similarities there. But essentially, in recognition of the frequency of droughts that we've been seeing, the fact that we're really moving towards an era of water scarcity, this package includes positions that will work on implementing drought response coordination, as well as long-term strategies for our water future. It also includes a position to work on in-stream restoration coordination. The agency usually is just in the role of processing. We don't have much in the way of outreach for that work. And then also it includes a water conservation position. Similarly, most of our programs around water conservation are really around water management and conservation plans. And we would like to have a dedicated water conservation coordinator that can do more of that public outreach and further develop those programs. And then finally, we have in here actually there's three more things. That's not finally, sorry. We also have a position. We've talked long about how small water systems are often the ones that are most vulnerable during drought because they don't have the bandwidth to really prepare for drought. So when we've included a position here that would assist these smaller communities with planning ahead for the future, finding funding and things like that. And then in addition to that, we also have a position or positions that would work on facilitating groundwater storage and recharge projects. We know that there's a need to further focus on groundwater recharge. And finally, there's also funding in here to contract for a study, likely with Oregon State University, to better understand how groundwater recharge is being impacted by changes in snowpack. So that's the short gist of what that package does.
All right. I'm not seeing any hands or anyone unmuting themselves. So let's drop down to Pop C. We're a little out of order, but let's go to Pop C, which I believe is Dwight. Whenever you're ready, Dwight.
Okay. There's the Deschutes groundwater mitigation program has this allocation cap of 200 CFS, and we're very close to reaching it. ODF&W and DEQ have had concerns about different parts of the program for years, especially the potential for impact of the program to springs that contribute cold water to the Deschutes and its tributaries. But we don't know what the impact is or how big of an impact that is. And so we've been talking for a couple of years about attempting to fund some staff and some study of major spring complexes in the Deschutes Basin so that we can understand if there's a negative impact or not. And if there is an impact, how to decrease or fix that for the program to go forward, for the mitigation program to go forward. So this this POP would fund a study of the spring complexes to find which ones are the best ones for fish habitat and whether or not there's a negative impact from the mitigation program. So that's what C is about.
Have you guys done some outreach with Coco on this at all? The study?
Yeah, we've there has been some talk with them about it. Yeah.
Okay. We'll follow up with them if they have any concerns on it as well. What could be the potential results of this study? Just so I have a better understanding. Is the potential that it could reduce the ability for mitigation in the basin?
It's possible. I don't know how big. I just don't know that much about the science to be able to, ahead of the study, figure out what the potential outcomes might be.
Okay.
So to be fair, I think it's dangerous to for a non-scientist like me to try to suggest what the potential outcomes might be.
Better to study it first, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Great answer. Thanks, Troy. Appreciate it.
All right, looks like Mark.
Yeah, thank you. It kind of strikes me, and this is maybe more towards Tom, Director Byler. Tom, how many more people do you have to hire before we even begin to talk about these POPs?
Well, that's not quite how I look at the question. For me, the question is, what kind of services do Oregonians want us to provide in terms of carrying out our responsibilities? And that's that's really the question in my mind. Related to that then would be if certain services or programs are desired or wanted, what will it take to achieve that? And it often involves FTE and people to make things happen. So that's so I can't give a definitive answer to that, but I can tell you that my sense, Mark, is that this agency's charge is enormous and it's important, and we are looking to try to provide the resources and capacity for us to be able to do our jobs well.
Well, I guess my reaction is, the last time we spoke, there's still a pretty big gap between the authorized positions that the department has and the actual warm bodies that have filled those seats. And there have been questions, there have been doubts raised about the ability of the department to fully fill those seats in a timely fashion, and as well as addressing some of the issues that the legislature has directed the department to do already. And I don't begrudge the department for putting up all these. I just worry about the ability of the department, as I have said before, and I will continue to say, to fulfill what the legislature has already asked you to do in this time where the department has received unprecedented and historically high investment. Not that I'm complaining about any of that, Tom. I just worried that the department may be getting a little bit over its skis, knowing that you still haven't been able to fulfill what the legislature has already directed you to do, I suppose is my point. So I don't begrudge or belittle or question necessarily what these POPs are and the intent and the good intent behind them. But I just worry that the department is being forced to swallow perhaps more than it can chew, is my only point. And Tom, I appreciate your point as well. I certainly understand that you folks are trying to fulfill many needs and so forth. But I just, again, worry that the department is biting off perhaps more than it can really digest and do in a really good fashion. So that's my only concern. And it's a concern that I believe several other people share. We're rooting for you. We want you to succeed, of course, but that's just my point. Thank you.
Mark, if I could follow up on that, I really appreciate your comment. And I guess a couple things. One is we're very much aware and interested in doing the best we can with the big lift that we have in front of us, that we've been experiencing and that we've been communicating with you and many others around. We know that it's taking time to build these new resources in this new capacity and to stand up new programs, et cetera. And you'll see, I think, in this list, we're going to be crosswalking some of those items where we think we may need to continue that work into next biennium. So I would ask folks, we'll try to highlight that as we go, but you'll see some of that nexus that of that work from the 2021 session that Mark is referencing, where we think and want to try to continue that into next biennium where appropriate. I would also just remind folks that this is an exercise that we're going through right now, as all other agencies are going through. And the list that you see in front of you is not the final list. It's subject to your input. It's subject to input from the commission. Whatever gets into our agency request budget, which will be published this summer, will be just that. It will be ideas that we have to try to fulfill our mission. And then we'll be subject to further scrutiny and probably downsizing in part by the governor for the governor's recommended budget. So there'll be a smaller subset that will be put forward in the governor's recommended budget. And then it has scrutiny by you all and the legislature and everyone else who has an interest in these programs through the legislative process in 2023, which will narrow the field even more. The one thing I guess I want to emphasize is that as part of this budget development process, I guess, that we go through at the state level, we sometimes get direction from the Department of Administrative Services, depending upon the state of the economy and our expectations around resources, to have low expectations about new funding. And in those cases, the budget development may be more focused on reductions than additions. We've not had that direction this go round, nor did we have it last time, where there was more favorable sense of the budget going forward and the resources that would be available to the state. And so this is a bit of a blue sky exercise for us. If there is no limitation on resources, what would we need to get our job done? And so that's why you see the number and the scale of ideas we're putting forward. And so I want to give you that context, and I just want to encourage you to give us feedback. It's going to help us to know what your priorities are, what you see as most important, and that'll help us shape our agency request budget and do this work going forward. So I appreciate the question, Mark, and the sentiment behind it.
Great. All right, let's jump down to item D, which is Rachel.
Thanks, Bryn. So item D, facilitating collaboration and data to improve understanding of Lake Ebert challenges. So as you all are, I'm sure, aware, Lake Ebert water levels are declining, highlighting significant interest in the basin regarding migrating shorebird habitat needs, important cultural resources for Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes, and drought and fire impacts on water supply for all users in the basin. WRD can help to study and document the hydrology and hydrogeology of the basin to support collaborative work on the ground. But without additional resources to support that work, we don't believe stakeholders will have adequate information for understanding effective solutions impacting to impact Lake Ebert water levels. So we've proposed some initial investments in data and data collection that we think can help to build and calibrate any required model for management purposes. And this package, I'll just note, it specifically highlights that this would require considerable further discussion and refinement with stakeholders and tribes on the ground. So I welcome any questions on this package as it sits now.
All right, I don't see any hands or comments. Just a reminder to folks, if you do have comments or questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. And if you could, please put the letter that you're referring to so we don't get lost in terms of what you're talking about. So let's go ahead and move down to E, which is Ivan Galls.
Morning, Bryn. Morning, everybody. Brad Lundy is going to step in and help me on this one as well there. We have a large amount of data that's housed within our agency. This includes our water well reports or well logs, a lot of water right information that has detailed information on it. The data themselves often are not digitized, so we haven't got point of diversions accurately mapped around the state as an example. The same for well locations. This type of information becomes important when we're looking at impacts to, say, water level declines in the Klamath Basin, and we want to estimate how many more domestic wells are at risk of going dry, with another estimated, say, 10-foot decline in the groundwater table. So this package looks at improving our data input and the mapping abilities of this to improve the accuracy. There's a couple of field assistants that would help do field locations, some data technicians in our Salem office that would be doing the input and the remapping and improvement of accuracy, and then an application developer to assist with all of that. And happy to take questions on it.
Okay, not seeing any hands or comments. So I say we just charge ahead. So let's drop down to item F, which I have Doug Woodcock or Tom Paul. You two can fight over it.
So Doug, who do you want to go?
Sorry, Tom, I was muted. I can take it. I'm just having a hard time getting my video going here. Okay. So this particular policy option package centers around the issue of the removal of dams on the Klamath River. We have a state scenic waterway on the Klamath River that is strongly controlled by hydroelectric operations at J.C. Boyle Dam. With the removal of that dam, the river in this location will be going back to a more natural flow regime, and the existing scenic waterway will no longer be relevant, if you will. The numbers will not apply. So this particular policy option package contemplates hiring a hydrologist and contract dollars to contract with biologists and recreation specialist consultants to assist the department in developing and working with Oregon Parks and Recreation as well in developing new state scenic waterway flow numbers that are more reflective of the new flow regime. And as OPRD continues to develop scenic waterways in Oregon, this position would help support that effort, which we've never had the capacity to do without dropping other work as well. So with that, I will open it to questions. Thank you.
Great. All right, sorry, I'm just copying questions over from the chat. All right, if we pop down to item G, that looks like Rachel's.
Thanks, Bryn. All right, item G, updating and maintaining surface water availability model, otherwise known, the update known as WARS 2. So OWRD's water availability model provides really critical data for allocation and planning decisions in basins, and it reflects the impact of additional allocation on irrigators, communities, and ecosystems. But the base period of 1958 to 1987 does not address the conditions we are experiencing on the ground today. Therefore, after some significant scoping, we've proposed to bring on board adequate staff, install additional required gauges, and modernize the essentially modeling tools that are needed for this update, as well as make sure we seek important public input on the process of this update. I wanted to just note that updating water availability has been identified as a priority in the 2017 IWRS and by many of the place-based planning final plan efforts as well. So happy to take your questions.
Bryn, given that we're moving along, can we go to, I see that Kimberly had a comment, there's additional state scenic waterways, or maybe it's scenic waterways work, I'm not sure, in the basin. OWD might consider expanding to cover that work. Kimberly, do you want to expound on that a little bit more?
Sure. As you know, as the department knows, you all have found that the trigger under the Scenic Waterway Act has been triggered, the groundwater trigger, finding that measurable reduction is taking place. And so this feeds into any discussions about groundwater permitting, which can't take place without mitigation. So there's definitely some work to do there on developing some sort of program, mitigation program, if there is going to be any further groundwater permitting. It's sort of one piece of a much larger conversation, but just wanted to note that you might want to expand it to allow for that work.
Thank you for that, Kimberly.
Sorry, Kimberly,
Okay, go ahead,
Was
Rick.
your comment specific to the Klamath?
Yes, it was specific to F.
Doug, did you have a follow-up comment? Sorry to
Oh.
interrupt. For all of you, if it gets weird here in terms of me, my Zoom keeps closing out and then restarting and closing out and restarting. And so I'm not missing the conversation, but I'm definitely missing some of the video here. So sorry about that, Doug.
Yeah, just wanted to acknowledge Kimberly's comment. As accurate, the state scenic waterway has a limitation on the amount of interference that can occur with it, and that has been exceeded in the Klamath Basin. And so there is a good deal of work that will need to be undertaken in the Klamath Basin around that state scenic waterway adoption of flow numbers and the mitigation program.
I see Peggy's
And then
hand
it
is up
looks
as
like, yeah, and Peggy, maybe you can comment on your PFA. I don't know what PFA stands for. I probably should, but if you can comment on that as well as you may have another comment.
Yeah, this is Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters. So the PFA is Private Forest Accord, which was mentioned as a part of the reason for the data needed in POP E. And I just was simply saying, since there was money allocated as part of the Private Forest Accord work, would WRD have access to some of that to take care of some of the costs of in POP E? But what I was really raising my hand about was POP G, the surface water. There's probably no one more excited about getting more data than the League when it comes to all of the water things. I am very concerned, however, as Mark shared, and I know that you were given the opportunity to ask for everything that you thought was needed in order to have the best water resources department ever. But it is so critical to take care of the groundwater issue that I just want to raise a red flag, although this is something the surface water part is certainly wonderful and we need that information. When I look at priorities, I want to just raise that as a comment. Thank you. Oh, I guess one last thing. These tiny documents are driving me nuts. And so I don't know if you can improve the little tiny pieces, and not for today and not for the screen, but even to be able to try to print the darn things is really difficult.
Thanks for that feedback, Peggy. All right, let's pop down to, I don't see any other hands or comments. So let's pop down to item H, which I think is still Rachel.
Thanks, Bryn. So this POP water supply monitoring is really to provide federal match for 3 federal programs that help to monitor water supply. So these new and existing programs, which include OpenET, the Agrimet network through the Bureau of Reclamation, I should say OpenET through USGS or BOR, though that designation is still being determined. And then expanding SNOTEL network as well, which is through the NRCS. All of these programs rely on state funding in order to meet essentially shared goals that the feds and the state have for this water supply monitoring. So this tracking of precipitation and evapotranspiration, it really is too expensive for the state to operate these networks on our own, and we really rely on these federal partnerships to support this work. We've had a lot of requests from either the planning, place-based planning groups, or other local stakeholder groups for stations like these And we think the most efficient way to support these groups is to provide this, this match to these federal partnerships. I'll take any questions you might have. Thanks.
All right, not seeing any hands or comments, so let's move right along. We're going a little out of order if you're following the traditional alphabet, so we're gonna pop over to item B, which is Ivan's.
Ivan Gall again here, folks. This one is entitled Improving Water Management and Assessing Levees. So we've packed a couple of different issues into this one policy option package. To address water scarcity increases around the state, we're looking for some additional field staff to help with responding to complaints, calls for water, and more complex water management challenges that we're finding out there. There's also an opportunity here to reclass our remaining NRS 3 water masters to an NRS 4 water master. If you recall, about 7 water masters last biennium were approved for a reclass up to the NRS 4 level, since they're dealing with more complex challenges out there. The other aspect of this is a dam safety ask. We're looking to do an inventory of levee systems around the state. There's not good existing information or data on those levees. And this would help us understand better flood potential and risk to some of the communities protected by these levee systems that are out there. Also looking to reclass one of our professional engineering positions from a PE1 to a PE2 to help with training and mentoring of junior staff in our dam safety program there. So I think that covers everything in this pop, and happy to take any questions.
Bryn, why don't we go ahead and if you can make column F a little bigger and then zoom in a little bit and just remove the title column just to try to make it a little more easier to see. And then go ahead and zoom in a bit more.
Hey, Raquel, I have a quick question. I was slow. On the dam safety side, I don't know if this is related or not, but I recollect that there are federal funds coming in to try to help with those type of infrastructure issues. I mean, I think of like Hag Lake and all those just in general. I mean, how does that play into that assessment? Is that a cogent question?
Yeah, Tom Paul, I might ask you to answer this because I know this was put forward by your folks. So this is about a levee assessment. The funding that where we've been primarily focused is on dam safety. There has not been as much focus in the state on levees. And my understanding is that there is really the extent that there's data about levees in the state is where the Army Corps of Engineers has levees that were certified or previously certified. And so the current information on levees in the state is, I don't think that there's even a map or a database where you can go in order to know where all the levees are in the state to then be able to assess them for safety. So that's one piece to it. The second piece to it, in terms of my understanding on this, and Tom Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm pulling from a couple of years of knowledge here. The other piece to it is then that the Army Corps of Engineers had levees that were certified, but I think they made some updates to their programs, or for some reason there was some changes that meant that some levees were no longer certified. And I think Mark probably knows more about this, given that his hand just went up in the role of special districts. And so I'll look to, I see that James and Peggy will get to you, don't worry. But I'm going to open the floor to maybe folks that have more knowledge on this topic, Mark and Tom Paul.
Well, I always take a back seat to Tom Paul.
I hope that's in the notes.
Well, I can
Tom, did you have
briefly-
anything to add?
Yeah, I could just.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark, and then I'll talk after you.
Yeah, so after Hurricane Katrina and Superstorm Sandy, FEMA went back and looked at all their regulations dealing with levees. As a result of a whole bunch of different factors, FEMA decided to update their regulations on the resiliency of levees. As a result, many levees throughout the country became sort of out of compliance because they no longer met the FEMA increased resiliency regulations. And there are examples of that all across the country, but the most prominent one, at least in Oregon right now, are the Multnomah County Drainage District levees that protect much of the northern edge of Multnomah County from the confluence of the Sandy River pretty much down to the confluence of the Willamette. And so they're going through a very long, expensive, arduous process of becoming recertified. And that is really the only levee that I'm knowledgeable about in the state that is seeking updated certification from FEMA. But there are levees throughout the state. I mean, we can talk Pendleton, we can talk Umatilla, we can talk Warrenton, we can talk Reedsport. We can go on and on and on about, oh, Turner has a levee just right near Salem. I mean, so these things are pretty critical, and I certainly understand the need here. I'll shut up now.
Well, and Mark, thank you for that. You're pointing out levees that are known, they're looked at, and there's been some effort to, keep them safe, and we still see failures. A few years ago, there was a levee down in Springfield that failed and flooded a number of homes. We had a levee along Upper Klamath Lake that failed a few years ago and flooded out a highway. The real message here is the state of Oregon does not have a comprehensive survey of where these levees are, and most of these levees have not been looked at. So from an engineering standpoint, they are really at risk, and there are properties, there are people, there are public infrastructure on the wrong side of these levees which are going to be at risk. So this is an ask to do an inventory and start the process. There are federal dollars coming in for dam safety, but we have looked at those, and an effort to inventory and do an initial assessment on the levees does not qualify for the federal funding, at least that we're aware of. What we're also seeing, as you are too, we're seeing more extreme events. So we have extreme droughts, but we also have extreme storm events, and going into a period where we're having more frequent extreme storm events is going to be, I think, putting stress on the levees we have that we've never seen before.
I appreciate that, Tom. I conflated the two. And so that hearing about eligibility does help me get this right sized in my brain. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I might also say that Keith Mills, who's been state engineer for us for a number of years now, has decided that it's time for him to retire and do better things or spend more time with family. So in the meeting today, we have Tony Janik, and Tony has been with the program for also several years now, has been learning a lot from Keith, and Tony is the new state engineer. So, he's on now so that he can kind of join in if need be, if there are questions specific to the dam safety program.
Great, thanks. Let's go to James and then Peggy.
Good morning, everyone. James Fraser from Trout Unlimited. I just had a question about item B, and I'm wondering if it's possible to break out the water master and levee safety components of this into two separate pops, because I like the idea of adding and reclassifying water masters so that the department can attract and maintain skilled staff, but I don't see how that relates to levee safety or why these two are grouped together. So if someone could just explain more about that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
James, we can certainly break them out. We were in a bit of a lumping phase here of trying to not have so many pops. And this one seemed like a good nexus given that our staff are often out in the field doing inspections, but we can always lump things together and we can always split things apart.
Thanks.
So just note that
I think,
adds another letter, James.
Yeah, I mean, just as a follow-up, what I'm thinking is, the baggage of one, I don't want it to weigh down another. So it seems to make sense to me to just allow one idea to stand for itself and to carve them apart like that. But I appreciate your reply.
Go for it, Peggy.
So back to levies. For the number of years now, particularly through, I believe, Senator Johnson's efforts, there has been levy money provided to do some levy repairs and whatever. I don't know which agency got that money. Was it Department of Ag?
It's OBDD.
Oh,
It's through the Infrastructure Finance Authority, Peggy.
Thank you. So I just want to bring it up because I get frustrated, as you've heard me already, with wanting to link things instead of pulling them apart. So I just want to make sure that we're paying attention to those linkages as we're looking at this issue. And I guess I would also make a comment related to the levies. What will be most important, just like it was with dam safety, is people safety first, property safety second. So if you have to reduce the amount, reduce the work being done, that's the division I would look for.
And Peggy, thank you for that. Yeah, I was just going to add, Raquel, that a first thing I think is really to do the inventory because until we complete an inventory or until the state of Oregon completes an inventory, we really don't have a good idea of levees that have people at risk below them.
Well, and if I might just chime in here real briefly, SDAO actually did an inventory of this infrastructure, I don't know, about 10 years ago. Tom, you and I should probably connect because it's certainly not a scientific inventory, but we do have an idea of looking at various diking districts across the state where some of that inventory may exist. So if this thing does, sort of take off from the runway, if you will, you might want to just make a note that we do have some historical documentation about that, and we might be able to be helpful. Just a heads up.
Appreciate that, Mark, and be reaching out.
And even if this thing doesn't move forward, I would certainly hope that you would reach out and link some of that information again, please.
It's not a pretty sight, though.
Yeah, and so again, that goes to, we don't have staff at the moment that focus on or work on levees, right? We've been trying to build up the dam safety program because we have not had sufficient capacity there. Peggy, I'll note that one avenue for us to explore further, as you noted, is that through the legislation that was passed related to Oregon business and levies, we had worked with their previous, I think it was their director or assistant director, and there's a provision in that law that would allow them to be able to provide funding to our agency for staffing purposes. The question at hand that we need to do some further investigations on, Tom and Tony, is so that, you know, individual left, and at the time, really the way that they were going to fund the position for us was through interest obtained. And so at that point in time, it was not right because there was no interest, right? So we may want to explore again whether there is that potential and whether there's an interest there and whether their funding sources would allow that.
Thank you.
All righty, great conversation. Let's jump back down further in the alphabet to item I, which I believe is Dwight.
This one has been lumped quite a bit to Bren and Raquel, so I can speak to a little of it, but there's parts of this that I'm not too familiar with. But, you know, there has been some interest in having a system that would allow folks to apply for water right applications or to submit water right applications online, and some other applications related to agency processing. A lot of other agencies are doing that kind of work already, but we don't have that at the Water Resources Department. We also don't have a system that allows people to pay for different agency needs online. So there's a fiscal portion. This is all related to IT resources and modernization of our various IT programs. Once we had a system that allowed for electronic, you know, submittal of an application, and I'm not just talking scanning your application in and sending it to the department, but keying the details of what you're interested in into our system. Once we had that developed, we could then link that to other systems that we already have and speed up the water right application processing and transfer processing as well. So that's a big part of this package, but as I mentioned, there's been some lumping to other things like developing an asset tracking modernization database and including gauging stations and other equipment that I am not familiar with.
Rachel or Brad, do you want to fill out the rest of the narrative here? This really is an IT modernization package.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Dwight described in the beginning of his narrative there, a lot of the needs that we have for tracking, maintaining, kind of just keeping our systems up and going, including our physical assets, IT assets, stream gauge assets, which are significant and expensive. really the challenge to doing that work has been our limited IT capacity. So even though it sounds a little funny to talk about stream gauges here, it really is an IS and a software need that we have in order to do that work more consistently. So we're not losing stream gauges, I promise, willy-nilly here and there, but we have not been efficient with our resources because we haven't been able to track them as effectively as we would like to. So that's the last part of that narrative there. Thanks.
I'm going to ask Lisa or Brad. Peggy put a comment in the chat there about IT systems and contractors. I think at this point, I think these packages for the most part are looking at in-house staff because there's such a high need across our agency and because we're so heavily reliant on data. But I wanted to check and see if there was any follow-up from Lisa Snyder or Brad.
I could address the question about, there is reference here to the stage gate process, the oversight process at DAS EIS. And that is something that can happen. It depends on the details of the project, the size and scope of the project. So there's a lot of unknowns at this point. This is more about staffing for existing system maintenance modernization, where we're just trying to play a lot of catch up right now at the agency after kind of a very lengthy period that had a lack of investment. During probably happened during a time when everybody started flocking towards, cloud computing and data science and mobile applications, and we stayed fairly static. So now there's a huge demand for all of this, and we're not positioned for it.
Go ahead, Peggy.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand better, and I hear what you're saying, but I also thought I heard need for new software and et cetera. I am concerned. I see all of these positions and I hear and I support the concepts of getting all of this information available to people and usable for people. If we're going to collect the data, it ought to be usable. I just want to make sure that it's really being done right and you're not just band-aiding the system rather than taking a look at the system as a whole and seeing what really does need to be done in order to bring WRD into the 21st century. And I guess that's why I'm suggesting that that having a contractor come in who understands that whole issue might be valuable. And that's not to disparage your knowledge, Brad, or anything. I just am concerned about the number of people that you have here. That tells me that you're looking at some real big changes. And are these changes the right changes with the current software, the current programs that we have, or is there a better way? Thank you.
And you bring up a really good point, and the analysis phase of any kind of effort like this is really critical. And there is the opportunity to reach out and maybe get a contractor, have that statement of work, and we have some tools within the state of Oregon to be able to kind of get those resources and end up with a recommendation, for example.
And Brad, we still need resources though to do that, right? So part of what we find is that, Peggy, in terms of the analysis phase, and maybe that's something for us to think more about, is that we need to have staff that are able to do those evaluations up front and figure out what the resources are needed and the project timeline and scope. And to your point, for some of these things, it may also be appropriate to bring in a contractor to do some of that work. Brad, does that align with what you've seen as well?
It does, and you also, so the point you bring up also is about honestly not having the resources even to engage properly in the analysis phase, possibly even coordinating the efforts of a contractor. It becomes a huge challenge when you're spending all of your time running from fire to fire, not having that opportunity to sit back and really focus strategically.
And that's my point. Thank you very much to both of you. Until I'm not saying you do not need resources for a contractor, but I am questioning whether you need all of these staff people, because the decision, once you have somebody who comes in from the outside and looks at all of the needs, knows what, and this is somebody who has done work like this around the nation for other water resources types agencies, can know what's available for software, can know all of those kinds of things, and can then help make the final decisions. But this really concerns me, the number of people that you're putting in here without what I see as an overall discussion and project development before you get there. Sorry.
Thank you, Peggy.
And just to make clear, so a whole long time ago, years ago, I helped work on a system for our manufacturing company. I do know the issues around setting up a brand new system and or trying to kludge an old system. And it's just important to have those conversations with experts.
Thank you, Peggy. Yes, I think what I'm hearing is a focus on the initial analysis and not necessarily all the staff to do the work. It may include staff to the extent that we need staff to actually help us do the analysis and put together the strategic kind of IT plan. But I hear what you were saying, so thank you.
All right.
Bryn, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I'm just looking to see if I see any other hands. Let's pop down to item J, which is Lisa Snyder.
Good morning. Item J is helping us ensure fiscal responsibility and timely accounting. As you know, the increased investments in water have increased the complexity and workload for our fiscal staff. Accounting staff are now monitoring and reporting on 30 different appropriations as compared to 8 in the 2013-15 biennium. Our total fund budget has tripled over the same time period, and the number of budgeted positions, I believe, has increased by about 40%. So this proposal is to make permanent and assist an existing accountant one position that plays a critical role in the statewide and internal fiscal reporting and monitoring of the funds. I see Peggy likes my J and K, so I'm happy for that.
Yeah, Lisa, let's drop down to K. I don't see any hands or anything other than fantastic emojis from Peggy.
Perfect. All right. Item K is our internal audit function, and this is probably an item that you recall from previous biennia. We have asked for this a couple times in the past due to us meeting the criteria in item 1C of OAR 125-700-0125, beginning back in 2016, requiring the agency to have an internal audit function if they have met a $10 million received and processed annually in cash and cash equivalents. Based on our 21-23 budget figures, we may be also meeting item 1A, which is a total biennial expenditure exceeding 100 million. The department has received a waiver for years 15 through 21, and we're exploring a waiver for the current biennium with the DAS Chief Audit Executive. As in bienniums past, we have reached out to OWEB, who has expressed an interest to share this position through our shared services agreement. And so this package proposes an internal Auditor 3 position shared with OWEB.
All right, not seeing other hands or comments. So Lisa, let's just bop down to L as well.
Righty. So for item L, I'm going to ask Raquel to join me on this proposal. What this is looking at is we're exploring ways that we can do the best that we can for our staff in training and hiring, and making sure that staff and managers have the right tools that they need to do the best job they can, that we can retain staff and develop our leadership team. Right now,
yeah, Lisa, I think you.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I think you nailed that. Yeah, just so for some context, you all may recall back when the department worked on its strategic plan. So we are continuing to use our strategic plan. It is not just a plan on the shelf. But if you look at our strategic plan, one of the things that came out of that effort in developing the strategic plan was really a need to invest in our staff and invest in creating a culture and environment where we can effectively retain those staff. This has become more important in our current economy, as you all know. I don't even need to go into it. You can read it all about it in the news in terms of the challenges that employers have from a standpoint of retaining folks. And so this is really trying to ensure that we have the funding for staff trainings, organizational development and management coaching, and associated consultants to make sure that we are really creating that environment where we are successful in retaining those staff, and where those staff can provide quality service to the public. So that's what this package is really looking to do.
Cal, it looks like we got a question from Peggy on that pop about opportunities to do a shared position on training with other agencies.
So Peggy, from my standpoint, this is really looking for, this would be like contract dollars, or I don't know if contract is the right word, but it's not the right word. It's more than that, because we're looking at both investing in trainings for staff. So some of those trainings would be put on for, potentially for all staff or all staff that are interested. We've been, for example, we recently brought in somebody from Willamette University to do a training on business writing, and a lot of our staff found that to be very helpful. We've cooperated with OWEB recently on facilitation training and partnered with them on that. And so those are the kinds of opportunities that we're looking for, but some of it is being able to ensure that we're, some staff are required to get specific professional training. And that's not necessarily something that we would do in-house. That is something that we really do need to bring or send them to very specific trainings, things related to, for example, hydrogeology, engineering, even communications. Those are all kind of specialized in that sense.
So my comment really was that it seems to me that this is really, I get that there are some narrow related to this agency, but the whole concept of making sure that we have a statewide, well-trained workforce and well-supported workforce belongs to the state and not just to this agency.
Yes, and Peggy, maybe what I should have added is that this is in addition to the statewide efforts. So the statewide efforts the Churro, Chief Human Resources Office, there we go. They have been putting out additional trainings, particularly geared towards managers, and our managers have been undergoing those trainings, and that is certainly a good starting point for us. However, I think there's additional work that's needed. In addition, we really are excited about the fact that from a statewide enterprise level, and by the way, those trainings, we still pay for them, right? Even if they're put on by DAS, we still have to pay for each employee to attend. Generally, they're not generally free. So that's a similar scenario in terms of one of the areas where we're really excited, which is that there is project management training that is offered through, I don't know that it's through DAS, but I think they've contracted with folks to provide this training, and it's a whole series. But for one employee to go through that whole series, I think it's around $3,000 or something like that. And that's really for, for project management, for example. So I don't want to give the impression that we are not tied into the statewide trainings, but those even do have a cost as well.
Great. All right, let's jump down to M, which is the public records. Pop, Raquel, that one is you.
Okay. I'm unmuted. All right. So this one is kind of twofold here. The first piece of this pertains to the fact that the department has an incredible amount of paper records still, and this includes water right files, and that the department really would like to work towards scanning its paper files and getting those to be more accessible, both for our staff, but also for the public. And so this proposes to include about $200,000 for a contractor. This would be in our base budget, and we would then assess how many records can someone actually get scanned in properly through $200,000 per biennium. And then the second piece of this is really about the fact that our public records requests have increased. So this is about people coming to the agency and asking for records. And in 2017, we'd received 140 public records requests. And we are, in 2021, we received 290 public records requests. So this continues to be a challenge in terms of providing records timely. As you know, that is something that the legislature has made clear as a priority in the law. But given the complexity of some of the records requests and given the increase, it continues to be a challenge. And so this is currently lumped into a position that has additional responsibilities, and this would propose to have dedicated staffing that would work just on public records requests. And if there are downtime in terms of public records requests, then work on that records retention piece. Mark.
Thanks, Raquel. Just a quick question on that. You mentioned that you have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 270 public records requests on an annual basis. Are those generally, I would assume, related to, are they domestic well inquiries? I mean, what is the majority of those public records requests? And I assume that the department would want to prioritize where you're seeing the most requests in trying to digitize those types of records, I would gather. Is that a fair assessment?
Mark, that is a wonderful question. Mostly because I know how to answer it, and the answer is yes. So that is why we're proposing to start with water right files. In terms of domestic well records, we do get a high level of traffic with folks looking for well logs. That's not actually a public records request because those are available online. And so we do have someone in our well program that helps people to navigate to those records. So those are not included in the 290 that we saw in 2021, for example. There's a lot more of those, and those ones are not included in this particular request. But where we do see a lot of requests is that folks, I would say a good majority of the requests are wanting to scan the file contents of water right files or transfer files. And so certainly that is where we would propose to start with this $200,000, per biennium for scanning purposes. And that I think it will take some time for us really to get through the water rights records, just given the amount that we have. Peggy?
To me, this links with the IT discussion, and I'm just trying to make sure that we don't miss that linkage, because just scanning the files without having them in the kind of in the manner that makes the most sense for the future use of all of that data is concerning.
Yes, Peggy, and that's something we certainly are mindful of.
All righty. All right, Raquel, this is your marathon of pops. So let's jump down to item N.
Y'all are gonna get tired of hearing me talk here. Okay, this next item is, we're on N, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So this pertains to something that the agency has also been talking a while about, and it started really again with that strategic plan, where we recognized that we had so much work on our plates, and that we really needed to start to move towards both project management as well as portfolio management. And so that's really about not trying to, portfolio management, for those of you, if you're unfamiliar with kind of the project management profession, that's specific to being able to manage all of the projects that you have and prioritizing those projects. And we really realized that we needed to work towards this. As you all may recall, the 2016 Secretary of State audit, which had talked about that we were overworked and understaffed, and that was something that reflected as we started to work through our strategic plan. And then of course COVID came around, and we had started some efforts to go in this direction, and then with COVID our attention was turned to other things. And then of course we had the increased investment, and so an about face increased investment, and really this just again re-emphasized the need for us to go in this direction. And so we really need to focus on building this infrastructure of project management and portfolio management within the agency. We have had some staff that have gone through project management training, and as a result, we pull them into projects because of their expertise. But really, it would be beneficial to the agency to have a person that was a dedicated professional project manager that would be able to help out on these high-profile projects, as well as provide consultation to staff that have their own projects. And then we also have identified, and I think many of you have experienced this, is we need someone that's more on the portfolio side, that's managing that portfolio, making sure that they're getting the information on all of the projects and where they're at, the challenges that each project is having, and bringing those in a forum to the management team to make sure that we are able to address those issues in a timely manner. And then also the piece, which is I think what I've heard from more of you about, is this desire for us to be able to communicate that out to the public and to stakeholders about where we are at with these projects and what challenges there are, in a way that is user-friendly format. So we've been attempting to do this with the spreadsheet that we've been providing for folks, but I've heard that there continues to be a desire for more and maybe different ways of communication. And so this position would be focused on providing that support for the agency, because all of this takes time. And ultimately, at the moment, it's me trying to get these, trying to do this. And often that means it's after hours and I'm trying to get this stuff done. All right. Any questions on that one or comments on that one before we move on?
Not seeing anyone, Raquel, so we can pop down to item O.
Great. Great. Okay. This next one is around public engagement and communications. And as you all may recall, we received one staff position in the 2021 session, which was focused on, frankly, we put too much into that position because the responsibilities varied everything from communications to emergency response. And now that we've hired that position, I hope you all get a chance to talk with Alyssa Rash at some point in time. We were very fortunate to get her. She worked at Marion County during COVID response and brings a wealth of experience. And really in working with her, we've recognized that we've just learned more about what we're not doing from a communication standpoint. And as you all know, water issues are becoming, there is a greater interest in water issues now. And that interest has been increasing over time. And I think we are also seeing the impacts of not having dedicated communication staff in terms of us making sure that we are getting information out to communities and to stakeholders about the work that we are doing, about decisions that we're making. And so we want to continue to build, I think, that program. And so this includes, I'll also note that we did get a lower level position in the December session, and that position is really focused on developing materials that will help people understand Oregon water law. And so this is a continuation on it in the recognition of we really need to move into social media and video and newsletters and having appropriate graphics to reach Oregonians in ways that are much beyond what our agency has done, which is a lot of things in writing that are often very long documents. And so this includes a position and some funding for what I've since learned, now that I have a communications professional on staff, that there is an amount, you need a communications budget to go along with your communications staff for things like graphic design and printing and public service ad buys, video production, those kinds of things, subscriptions, online tools. So that's what that package includes.
All right, not seeing any hands or comments. So let's jump down to item P. That's still you, Raquel.
Right. Great. So this one has a lot in it. And so I'm going to try to keep this high level. This is really around both racial and environmental justice, as well as equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the agency has really, it was back in, I would say last year, where the agency really started to have a greater focus in this area. We formed the first diversity, equity, and inclusion team within the agency. And that team continues to meet. And so part of this POP has been developed with collaboration with them. And part of this POP has also been developed in reviewing the Oregon Water Futures report for areas where we thought that were within our purview. And really, I think this POP, you'll see, has two components to it. One of which is kind of internally facing, which I want to recognize that when we say internally facing, that is a bit superficial to say that, you know, only the work that you're doing is internally facing. But I think of that in from the standpoint of creating an inclusive and belonging workplace culture and environment. And that is both looking at fostering our a culture where folks feel like they are able to come to work and belong, and then also assisting in the development of mentorship and coaching trainings and those professional development opportunities in order to help diversify our leadership pipeline, as well as for agency succession planning. And I think the other area where we've seen, and this is where I say this line of internal is superficial, is that as many of you may know, science and engineering fields have long had challenges in terms of diversity in the field. And really, we need to develop programs to increase interest in water as a career down at the student level. And so this is something our internal staff have been very interested in, and I think complements a lot of the other agency programs. So we also need to, like I said, this is a somewhat new arena for many of our staff. And so helping to develop trainings within the agency to align our agency practices for more inclusive processes. Those are some of the things that we're talking about when we say inwardly facing, which again, I think is a bit of a line that is not just focused inwardly, but that ultimately will help our staff then as we work externally and serve Oregonians. And then the second position that we have proposed in here is really a bit more outwardly focused, and this is helping to increase the understanding of water issues in Oregon for underrepresented and underserved groups, and help them to learn more how to engage in water policy issues. Developing a policy on stipends. You'll see that many agencies are going in this direction. And this is intended to increase capacity for participation, building relationships with community-based organizations. That is something that we've really started to do this year, and we've got a long ways to go. And having someone dedicated to being able to help the department support the work of community-based organizations to bridge informational gaps will be important. There's a whole bunch more in this POP, which you all can read about, but that provides a high level. I think another piece to this then is also our internal staff, and particularly have expressed an interest in assessing both the agency's current culture to understand what's working and what could be different. So this is contract dollars for a third-party assessment, as well as, and this is to establish really the goals and objectives. So we need to kind of know where we stand in order to know where we need to go, and give us a baseline for our DEI initiatives. So that way we can really assess what progress we're making. And then also this assessment would look more outwardly at actions that we could take externally to increase our best practices around transparency and inclusion, and environmental justice and racial justice. So that's the high level summary, and I'll see if there are any questions or comments on that one.
Marianne.
Hi, Marianne. Good morning.
Good morning, and I apologize for not being on video schedule. I am on the road to Klamath Falls through the duration of the meeting, so apologies. And with that in mind, I haven't had a chance to read through this in as much detail as I would want. Consistent pieces of feedback that I'm getting from my members as they look at all of the different agencies, kind of DEI initiatives, and to kind of bring racial justice issues front and center within agency policies and programs, is kind of the missing link between, I think there's a lot of desire, and I think it's a positive thing to reach out to CBOs and to reach out to groups kind of doing environmental justice and racial justice work and ask what they need. And a little missing is recognizing that there's members of the BIPOC community and of whether it's rural communities or different environmental justice communities within other stakeholder groups. And you know, for particularly our BIPOC farmers and ranchers, there's been a huge interest in, you know, getting into increased access to farm opportunities, which necessitates access to water as a way of, you know, building intergenerational wealth and, you know, being more of part of a system that has not been as accessible historically. And I'm interested how the department is going to kind of ensure that both perspectives in the conversation are represented. So not just environmental justice, you know, organizations represent people that tend to live in cities or that are kind of more domestic water users or have more of a kind of drinking water or recreational relationship with water. But also the fact that, particularly in the BIPOC community, there's a lot of, you know, farmers and ranchers or people that are looking to get into farming and ranching, and access to water is a huge component of their needs as well. Consistent pieces of feedback I get from my BIPOC members are like, we don't really feel represented in this conversation, and where and how can we engage to ensure that the lens is wide enough to encompass all perspectives.
Marianne, thank you for that question, and I'd certainly love to talk more with you about it. I think that is the value of us having a position that is really trying to increase folks' understanding of how to engage in water policy issues. And I see that is certainly that's in part focused on rural folks as well. And so when you talk about BIPOC folks in rural communities, I see that is a nexus for us in this policy option package. And that proposal is not just focused on community-based organizations, but it's focused more broadly from my standpoint. I think it's also in recognition of this issue that you are bringing up. I think we've also tried to include, if you look at the communications related positions, so we're interweaving these concepts not just through this one package, but we are trying to think more about it across the agency and our agency programs. And so when you look at our communications kind of package it or positions, we're looking at it we are looking to include rural folks in in the communications and increasing awareness. So I would welcome the opportunity to talk with you more about that, to make sure that we are taking into account different methods and approaches to make sure that BIPOC folks in rural communities feel like we are undertaking efforts that include them.
I have bad reception, so you may not be able to hear me, but thank you if you can.
I heard the thank you. Thank you. Let's chat more.
All right. I don't see any other hands or comments. So let's jump to item Q. That's also you, Raquel.
All right. This package is focused on policy. So some or many of you have, when you have been talking with us about projects, you've heard us talk about a long rulemaking backlog, and that the agency has not had the resources to complete very many rulemakings. So this package includes basically additional resources for water policy staff. I think we see this challenge, for example, with groundwater. There's a lot of need for groundwater policy. And I see this package I've heard from some folks saying that they want to make sure when we're making policy changes that we're having the conversations that we have inclusive and transparent processes, and that all takes staff capacity to do. I think the other reason for this focus, this increased focus in policy is because, we've seen challenges. Well, we've seen that, place-based approaches, there's a desire for a lot of specific policies for their regions. And we really have a challenge from a capacity standpoint of being able to fulfill all the various desires for policy in the state. I know that in addition to groundwater policy, which we've been talking with folks about, is an example, I know there's an interest in our water rates programs and our water rates processes, and we just don't have the staff capacity from a policy standpoint to be able to carry forward all of the different work that folks would like to see. So that's what these positions are proposed for. And really, we were thinking of 3 positions, which would allow us to have a policy person essentially to support kind of each division within the agency.
Okay, not seeing any hands or comments. So let's go to item R, which is still you.
So item R, item
Raquel,
R is
I'm
kind of a twofold.
To get my hand up. When will you have a better sense of like what these policy initiatives are, or is it going to be, is the need so broad across kind of all program areas that it's going to really vary? Like they're not going to be focused just on water rights or just on some of the more like the more kind of community engagement components of policy development, or like, do we have any sense of where they'll be focused, or is it going to be really across the board?
Yeah, I think so. We put forward 3 positions, and you may recall we also received a policy position during the December session, and that December session position will be focused primarily on kind of cannabis and water enforcement, as well as from the standpoint of just our need, providing some additional capacity from a climate and drought standpoint, although that's a pretty big, those are pretty big buckets, but it's a symptom of I need to take some things off of my plate, right? And so really that position was obtained with, primarily the focus on enforcement, water distribution, and cannabis. And so I see we have you all may recall, Breeze is the other policy position, which she has left the agency. That position has historically had a lot of different things on the plate. A portion of that work is the tribal liaison work. A portion of that work is policy. A portion of that work is the integrated water resources strategy. And then often many other additional kind of subtasks. And so really what you see is, and I know you all have experienced this, is we haven't had really the bandwidth to move forward, really more than one kind of rulemaking. We try to do more, but you've seen them get bogged down because we just don't have the capacity. And part of that is that we're bringing in, we don't have policy people that are working with each section on a continuous basis. So you'll see other agencies have policy staff that are that are working on, programmatic issues. And we have to, when we start a rulemaking, we learn about the issue. And that means that we're always just doing what needs to be done. And there's not someone that's necessarily able to do all the forward-looking work with that. So I would see, in terms of these positions, I would see one that would support the Water Rights Services Division from a policy standpoint. I'd see one that would support the Technical Services Division. So those are kind of our groundwater and science and well construction and dam safety folks. I'd see then another position that would support the work in the director's office in regards to like our funding programs and kind of local basin issues. And then one position kind of supporting the field services division. So that's the water distribution and management side. And so that's what I'm kind of thinking of from a big picture, Marianne. And obviously as we, and that takes one of the existing positions, right? And it accounts for that. So that's what I would look for. And obviously we would modify it depending on, you know, whether other packages were received and the amount of positions that were received in this package at the end of the day. I think that was a thank you. So hopefully, James.
Yeah, hi Raquel, just following up on something you said there. Given the limited staff capacity on rulemaking, I'm wondering if the department really needs 2 rules coordinators. I know that you're working to fill Breeze's position, but are you confident that this staff capacity issue will resolve when her position is filled, or would it make sense to add a second rules coordinator position in this POP?
So from my standpoint, all of these positions would be working on rules.
Okay, thank you.
So I would see that as one component of the potential policy. So it could be, you know, general policy, procedures, rules. In the event that there was legislation, they could provide support there. Although the one person I didn't mention, you all know who's on the call right now, which is Bryn Hudson. Bryn is focused on legislation. That is a full-time job now that we have annual sessions and sometimes more than that.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay,
All
so
right.
I'll move into this.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Raquel. I was just going to tell you to keep going.
Yep. This next position here is a tribal engagement position. As I noted, the tribal engagement work has been traditionally within, within Breeze's position. And so it's been a small portion of her responsibilities, her former responsibilities, since she's no longer with us. And really a lot of that was attending the LCIS various working groups. And I think that we have a desire to improve our coordination and government to government relationships with tribes. And so we see this as an opportunity here. We also have this position proposed because we have been working with C2IR and on negotiation related to their federal reserved water rights, and having a staff person that is fully engaged in that work would be beneficial. So that is what we have proposed here, and I see that Phil has comments.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. Phil Donovan on behalf of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla. Just as it relates to this item, I'd point out, first off, our Board of Trustees doesn't have an official position on this, so I'll have to, jump through some hoops there, but I will share the observation that in 2013, the Oregon Department of Education created something akin to this position, and they called it an Indian Education Specialist. That's actually morphed now into an Office of Indian Education. I just point out that agency is doing exemplary work in maintaining relations with tribes, identifying emerging issues. And then when the Oregon legislature passed Senate Bill 13, which is Indian education curriculum, that agency was ready to go because of having an Indian education specialist in there. So anyways, seems like a really good idea. And I'm pushing this idea in a couple of other places as well. So just wanted to share those thoughts, and we'll look forward to taking an official position further down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Marianne?
Yeah, I guess just a question of the things you mentioned seem not like the same skill set, I guess. So to me, somebody who is working with the tribes on reserved water rights and quite frankly on adjudications feels like a very technical based skill set and probably a legal J component, because I know the scope of reserved water rights is generally heavily litigated. That feels like a very different set of skills than somebody to be liaison with the tribes. And I know you all are having kind of the ongoing formal work group that you're kicking off, or I don't know the official name of it, but you know, more of the coordination, communication, making sure that there's an information flow. Those feel like very different things to me, and that the department has very different, technical and legal roles in each of those things. And so to have them seemingly reside in one person feels a little confusing, but I'm assuming there's something I'm missing, because again, those just feel like very different skill sets.
I guess I would, Marianne, I'll have to think on that more. I think from my standpoint, I would see, and I don't know, Tom, if you have thoughts on this, but I would see this as a person that is really working as the liaison between our staff that have all of the various expertises. And I do see this person, though, I think if you're going to work in this role, my expectation would then be that this person brings a background and understanding of tribal issues, as well as federal reserved water rights pertaining to tribes and the law around that. But I see that as being a part of their understanding, and that their role is then really being able to serve as a liaison, work with the various staff within our agency, and also bring that high level, when I say high level expertise, I'm not saying it from that's probably not the right word, bring the expertise that is needed to work through these issues, with tribes. So I don't see it as a different skill set, but let's see what Phil thinks. And I don't know if Tom Byler has anything to add.
Director Byler, or do you want me to comment?
I'll just weigh in briefly. I'm of the same mind as Raquel in terms of kind of the concept of and the value of this kind of position. Just to add a little bit to Raquel's comments, I can see not only this position being helpful in terms of us improving and deepening our communication with individual tribes on a wide variety of matters, but I also see the added value of this position helping better inform and educate our own staff around around issues related to working with tribes and the unique complexities of working on tribal issues with respect to water, which of course with water, there's always a subcategory of expertise on almost every issue that we deal with. And this position would, I think, be very helpful in that regard. Go ahead, Phil.
I was just gonna comment that maybe the putting in of the C2R is why Marianne thought, whoa, that's wading into something very technical. And of course, we're going to have a little bit further conversation about another pop. But, first off, just to follow up on what you said, Director Byler, you just need someone focused on this. There's like a lot of things that are happening out there. There's 9 federally recognized tribes, and there just needs to be somebody that's keeping track of all those issues, who then can get the right people with the correct technical expertise to be effective. And, going back to the Department of Education example, there, ODE ultimately hired April Campbell from Grand Ronde Tribe's Education Department. So there you brought in somebody certainly with knowledge in the issue areas that they were looking for. And I would certainly expect that with as robust a Department of Natural Resources that you've got in the different tribal governments, that hopefully WRD can poach a good person. Nah, that's the wrong way to phrase it. But anyways, you get my point. Yeah, we should have somebody that's got knowledge in this issue area. But really, I think we're looking for a liaison. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, Marianne, what it makes me kind of think of is, you may recall, I don't know, Phil, you'll have to help me out. I can't remember her name. What was the woman's name that was the head of LCIS for Karen Quigley? She was the head of LCIS for, I don't know, 20 years, and she came with a law background. So Marianne, I think you are correct in the sense that it's good to have somebody that has kind of a background on these issues that can bring that technical legal expertise. And at the same time, I think Karen obviously maintained relationships with the tribes for 20 something years and before she retired. So if that is helpful context, maybe.
All right. I don't see any other hands. Raquel, we're going to give you a break. Let's hop to item T, which is Kim Ogren.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kim Fritz Ogren. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Planning, Collaboration, and Investments Section Manager. In this POP, it is recognizing the increased complexity that we are seeing with water management issues across the state, and builds on some of the efforts that we've partnered with you on in terms of securing resources for senior level staff to work through these complex issues with partners in the basin. So we're proposing 4 additional NRS 5 basin coordinators to work in those regions that do not currently have that position. You might recall from last biennium, thanks to a lot of your efforts as well, we were able to secure positions for the Willamette and Deschutes Basin, but we see a need growing across the state in other regions as well as to work on bi-state issues such as groundwater management and the recent court case. This package also proposes to make permanent the special assistant to director position that Tom Paul has been filling for the last several years. And then there's just a note that there's a placeholder and we're interested in getting feedback if folks think there might be a need for additional resources to work on the Willamette reallocation, to work alongside the basin coordinator that we recently hired, Alyssa Micken. Happy to take any questions or feedback.
All right, Kim, I'm not seeing any hands or comments. So let's jump to item U, which is still you, Kim.
Thanks, Bryn. We see and hear from you and others the continued need to provide financial resources for feasibility studies and projects and wells that continue to go dry in areas of extended drought. So this package is proposing to recapitalize or put additional dollars into those funding opportunities so we could do and continue to provide grants to those that are seeking to address in-stream and out-of-stream needs or well deficiencies. This package also proposes some funding for a application and grant database, which would allow us to have an online application system, making it easier for folks to apply for funding, and then would improve our management and administration of those grants on the back end, allowing for improved reporting on metrics and outcomes achieved from the results of the public investment in these funds. Any questions or comments? Oh, and I will also note it proposes to make the limited duration well fund coordinator position permanent, as we expect there'll be continued demand for assisting domestic well owners with their dry wells. Thanks for the thumbs up, Peggy.
All right, thank you, Kim. Not seeing any hands or comments at this point in time. So let's move on to item V, which is Ivan.
Good morning, Ivan Gall again, Field Services Division Administrator, talking about item V here, which is state match funds for the Harney Basin Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. We continue to work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to build this new program designed to help retire groundwater rights in the Harney Basin. The overallocation of that groundwater resource has resulted in groundwater level declines that are occurring there. For those of you interested, of course, we just wrapped up the study. It was just published and a press release came out a little over a week ago there. So please take the time to review the study. It's very important scientific work here in the state. If you recall, last biennium, we were provided $500,000 in state matched dollars to match federal funds for this CREP program there. Those dollars are still fully intact. They won't be spent until we roll out the program and start getting enrollments into the program there. We don't have a sense of how many people will enroll or how quickly those funds will last. So this is a placeholder where we would be going back to the legislature on a recurring basis to replenish those funds if we get a lot of activity in the program. These are 14 to 15 year long contracts where each year the landowner who enrolls will be paid a certain amount of state dollars and federal dollars for the amount of enrolled acres there that meet the criteria for the program. And so this amount of requests to the legislature could increase if we have a lot of enrollments and the program becomes very active. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you for responding to that, Kim. It looks like you'll follow up with Mark offline on his question regarding planning. Ivan, I'm not seeing any hands or questions as it relates to Harney CREP. So with that, let's go ahead and drop down to item W, which is Raquel again.
Good morning. So we've talked about this position over the years here, and essentially, as you may recall, the integrated water resources strategy position traditionally has been, or the integrated water resources strategy has traditionally been a part of a broader workload for staff, and one staff position in particular. And as a result, that has meant that we don't have a lot of capacity to continue on an ongoing basis to coordinate on implementation of the integrated water resources strategy, as well as to adequately, I think, prepare for updates to the integrated water resources strategy. During this past biennium, we were able to get a limited duration position. However, we see the integrated water resources strategy, as you all know, updates are required every 5 years. And there's a lot of work that should be going on in terms of coordination, reporting out on the work that is being done, and making sure that we are coordinated as we move forward on implementation updates and working with communities on those updates. So this proposes to have a dedicated person for the integrated water resources strategy, and that it not just be limited to a limited duration position.
All right, not seeing any hands or comments. So let's go ahead. That was W. Let's go to Pop X, which is Kim.
So in the 2021 legislative session, the legislature invested in the state-supported regional planning and management work group that has been meeting since January. And this is a bit of a placeholder to see if the work group feels that that work must continue into to next biennium, and then providing the resources to support that continued effort should it be necessary.
All right, not seeing any hands or comments. Kim, let's go ahead and flip Z, A, and Z, just because that makes a little more sense from a flow perspective. So why don't you go ahead and cover item ZA before we jump back up to item Z?
Yeah, so item ZA is to provide financial assistance for planning. It is tied to a water planning legislative concept that we are working on and want to work with you to refine further. But this is the corresponding POP that would place money into a fund to support development of a number of different kinds of water plans that we found are needed across the state, and then also provide funding to support the implementation coordination of those plans. So we've heard from the place-based planning groups and others that it is really difficult to find funding for group capacity and coordination to keep a group cohesive as they implement a plan. And we all desire to not have these plans sit on the shelf. We want them to be implemented. And so this proposes some specific funding to allow those groups to continue their work together. And then along with creating, proposing some funds for new grants for planning is some staffing resources to facilitate the distribution of those dollars.
All right, Kim, I don't see any hands or comments, so let's jump back up to item Z, which looks like, oh, sorry about that, Marianne. Go ahead.
Well, Brent, I just wanted to confirm, we're having like a whole other meeting about this, right? I think that's probably why everybody's quiet on it, but I just wanted to confirm my understanding that there's a whole other meeting happening about all of this work.
Yep, Marianne, you are correct. So we'll cover that at the end of the meeting, but yeah, we do plan on having a workshop on the 10th of May on this and the LC as well. So this is not the last time we'll be talking about this one.
Yeah, and thanks, Marianne, for pointing out that additional opportunity and for a more in-depth discussion.
Yeah, appreciate it as well, Marianne. Thanks for flagging that.
All right, let's pop up to item Z. It looks like Raquel and Kim, you tag team that one together.
Yeah, perhaps I'll start and then Raquel can join. So the flip side, or the companion potentially to investing in planning development and coordination of implementation of plans, as we've heard some interest in additional implementation funding for plans that would be outside of our competitive funding opportunities. So something that is common in other states is they have sort of maybe a basin implementation fund, where if you have a state recognized plan, you get access to other dollars. And then we've also just heard interest from basins across the state, a need for bigger pots of money than our competitive funding opportunities provide. So we're interested in hearing feedback from folks if there is interest in pursuing dollars for this, and
what amount and what are those specific needs that you guys see.
And Kim, if I might add, in terms of one of the things that we'll need to work through in the future is that there's not a statutory funding mechanism set up for this work. So currently we would be looking at it through the standpoint of it going into, for example, the Water Supply Fund, which some of you may be familiar with, is a fund that we have already established in statute that is typically where the legislature puts items for direct appropriations from for specific projects. And that program is not, that I shouldn't say it's a program, that funding item is not necessarily, it isn't set up to have, a particular set of criteria or kind of.
Raquel, you're muted for some reason. Raquel, I think we lost the last bit of your comments. You randomly got muted and you're still muted.
Yep, Zoom keeps quitting and restarting. So, and it used to when I come back, even though I'm on the phone. Sorry about that, folks. So I don't know where I cut off, other than I'll just close with, this is something that you'll see we don't have specific funding proposed because we know there is a need, and the question in part is around the mechanics of fulfilling that need and how we would go about that. So I'll leave it there. And Marianne, I noticed that your hand didn't go down, but so I don't know if your hand is up because you want to comment on this item, or it's gone. So I guess that answers that question.
Sorry, I'm having
Thank
the
you.
same issue as you are, where it's like in and out, and I'm also trying to drive, and so I keep forgetting to lower my hand. So I apologize.
No, that's okay.
All right, I'm not seeing any comments or hands, so I think that means we can move on to item ZB. So I believe that is Kim.
Yes, so also in the 21-23 biennium, the legislature designated $500,000 to support the CREST phase 2 work. And we're working to get those funds to Umatilla County, but just wanted to put a placeholder in case those funds are needed beyond this biennium as well, that they continue to have access to those dollars. Since it is general fund and generally that needs to be spent within the biennium, we just wanted to flag that work may or may not need to continue into next biennium as well.
So I see Kimberly's comment on ZA. I think this is the planning one. Kimberly, I'll let you decide if you want to just save that for the workshop or if you would like to kind of expand on these comments a bit before we move on. Sorry, jumping back to ZA quickly.
Sorry, yeah, no, I'll save it for the workshop, but just wanted to note that there have been a lot of past discussions about the funding stream, whether feasibility projects, et cetera, and how that tied to place-based planning. So I just don't want to lose past discussions on this.
Thank you. Okay. So that was ZB. Let's go, sorry, I'm cracking myself up saying all these letters. Let's go to ZC, which that is still Kim.
Yeah. So ZC, the overarching goal is to provide communities who are doing water planning, and I use the communities very broadly, so whoever doing water planning to have access to the data they need to do that planning. Something that we've learned through the pilot phase of place-based planning is perhaps we didn't have different tool sets or data sets and analyses ready to give to the planning groups for them to use in their work. And so this POP proposes some additional resources to focus on development of the tools and data sets that we found all the planning groups either asked for or needed specific to our agency. So that is basin scale water demand information, as well as characterization of water rates. So sort of data specific to our agency that the planning groups in the past wanted, and we imagine that future groups will also need in order to have robust plans that address in-stream and out-of-stream needs.
Go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're having this conversation later, but I would encourage we put all of these POPs kind of into that conversation, and hopefully it'll after we've had the next legislative work group meeting, because it just on some level I think it's impossible for those of us that are participating in that process to like have a POPs when that process is literally evaluating what's needed for regional planning, and then the department has this set of like, here's what we think is needed for regional planning, tell us what you think. So I'm sure I'm not alone, but I just want to officially state, you know, I think we're going to have comment, but I'm really reserving that comment until after the other processes play out. It's a little odd to be doing this so far in advance of giving feedback on this so far in advance of the process that's seemingly developing the same thing concluding.
Yeah, so Marianne, I would encourage you to provide us with feedback. I don't think you have to wait. If you want to, you're certainly welcome to. And of course, you know, we recognize that the part that's awkward, obviously, is that we've got deadlines.
Oh, Raquel, I think Zoom restarted on you again.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. I stopped talking this time, though. Now that I know that it mutes me. So Marianne, I think that I just lost my train of thought, but certainly we recognize
it was that you have
deadlines.
I think was
Yeah,
for you.
so yeah, thank you. You know, so the awkward part is always with the times, the deadlines, and we want to make sure we get something in, right? So that it's part of the conversation in our agency request budget. And it may mean that down the line, either through the governor's recommended budget or when we get into legislative session, if these are even in the mix, right, that they need refinement. So that's obviously the challenge that we have. But I would encourage folks to not feel like they have to wait for, you know, one venue to provide feedback on these items.
Okay, well, I mean, in that case, I think on like what these data sets are, how they differ from statewide data that's available. Is there a need for additional statewide data? Are you going to focus on specific regions that have been identified for future place-based planning? How do basins get in line for that? I keep hearing that we need more place planning, and I assumed again this would come through the legislative work group process, but I feel like I need a lot more detailed information on where those data gaps were, what kind of information it is, how much like the open ET information is going to provide it, how much it's just general, like more stream flow gauges. Is it more groundwater data? And is that being collected statewide? And do we need to push for more data collections statewide? Or are we going to somehow prioritize basins that are in line for place-based planning? And then like, in terms of like, does the department go in 5 years in advance and start a data collection effort before the region even gets considered for place-based planning? So those are the universe of questions I have that I feel like need to be, to the point that Peggy was making earlier, it feels like we need to not just say like data and let's throw stuff that helps, we need to be strategic about it.
Marianne, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you giving us the rundown of kind of the types of questions that you have in your head. I think I'd say I'm certainly not the person to answer all of the questions that you just threw out there. I will see if Kim has anything that she wants to say, but we can certainly note that these are additional questions that we have for the future. The one thing I would say is that this request is my perception, and Kim, feel free to jump in and tell me if I'm wrong here about this, is my perception about this particular request is that it is arising, maybe not the water use reporting one, because that one's arising out of what the long-term need that we've been talking about with all of you, which is the need to update that database so it's more user-friendly. And but the other pieces to this, particularly the water rates characterization tool and the things that Kim was talking about, those are arising from our conversations with the planning groups and the people that have gone through the process. And so if, over time, when we've done check-ins with them, this is my understanding, is that this has been one of the issues that has been raised. And so this is, we developed this out of what the kind of the lessons we've learned along the way from the planning efforts. And certainly we can talk more about those and those lessons learned. Kim, is that a correct summary? And do you have anything to add?
Yes, that is correct. So the specific tools that these staff would tackle in the near term are based on feedback we've gotten from planning groups and sort of help us prioritize what data those communities need access to. And part of the POP includes some funding for outreach to have conversations of, okay, so this is the data that communities have expressed a need to access. Here's what data we have currently, but let's talk about, the details of what a tool should take, and can work with all of you and others in the development of those data sets and tools so they are responsive to community needs. Looks like April has a question.
I appreciate those responses. I just want to flag, I don't think those super answered my question. So I still have a question about, like, practically what is the rollout of how this looks in terms of future planning within communities. Like, and they tell you what data they want, and how do they know that if they haven't done planning? Is it a uniform data set that each community is going to get in advance of planning? Like, I want to flag my question still remain. I don't feel like that answered my question.
Totally, Marianne. Yes, I agree that they don't. I think for these two, it would be to develop the data set statewide by different basins so that it would enable whatever regions were interested in doing planning, that they would have access to do so. There's some efficiency in doing it statewide versus a more reactive approach, which is what we took with the place-based planning groups, where we developed it by their region as they requested it, which I think caused some delays in their planning as opposed to proactively having that information available to different places.
Go ahead, April.
Okay, so I have a few thoughts and I have a lot of questions, but I don't think, well, we're already over time and I know that. And I think other folks have raised some of the similar issues, and I'm going to endeavor to be kind, that I realize that the department staff has a lot on their plate. And that, as we've discussed, you guys have deadlines both for the budget concepts and the legislative concepts that unfortunately don't allow for really good stakeholder outreach, involvement, and discussion. We are going to have more discussions, though, about many of these things, and I think that's good. For those of you who haven't been a part of these things in the past, while we did not do them in this virtual format, there has been a similar thing where we rank our respective priorities in that high, medium, low column thing. And I think that's something that we should endeavor to do. But I think it would be very helpful to, one, have this information, no offense, but not in this hideous spreadsheet. I get that it's good for the department staff to be able to track things, but I've got them printed out and I'm looking on the screen, and it's really hard to go back and forth through those different things. The other part is, I think this may not be appropriate for all of these items, but there's a number of these items where you guys could maybe put them in individual documents or something that makes it easier for people to pull out the parts they want. And if you could link, like hyperlink existing things that tie to these things, it might be helpful. And I know I just said things twice, but for example, there's a number of these items that are related to existing things that are happening, mostly related to implementation from the last session. And I think it would be extremely helpful whether there's links, or at least whether there's specific notes that are added to these items that talk about how these new funding requests relate to the previous funding requests, particularly where there's staff that haven't been hired for some of those things, and now we're looking to ask for more staff. I probably should have said this at the beginning. My concern is this is not setting us up for success as a state. And aside from what my organization's specific priorities may be, I have a huge amount of concerns that going to the 2023 legislature which will be drastically changed from what we've seen before, meaning regardless of the election outcomes, there's going to be a whole bunch of new people that don't understand water. Water is always kind of at the bottom of the barrel, scraping for resources. There was a huge amount of resources that were invested in the last session. And I think even those that weren't around are going to have a lot of questions about what have you done with that? And here you are asking for a bunch of new things. And I get you need to do that. And there's a number of things on here that I think are good and important, but we're going to need to have more information so that those of us who can advocate in support of these things have the tools to do it. I also think one of the other elements that would be helpful that I've seen you guys do in previous things is where there's a connection with the IWRS, where there's a connection with specific legislation that has directed you to do certain things, or the Water Resources Commission has directed you to do certain things. I think that would be helpful, because that also is a set of priorities that help guide these different things. And then I might have had a third thought, but it disappeared. And I think there's a lot that I gave you right there, but I do think we need to have some more discussions about, we're going to have a specific meeting on the regional planning, and there's the work group that's all associated with that. But I think there's a number of other things in here that, similar to how we had the sub meeting on split season, we may need to, perhaps based on the feedback you guys get, if there's a need for some topical meetings to kind of dive into some of these details, I think that would be welcome to some of us, but I think it also should be something that is made available to other folks who maybe are newer to these issues and may find it a little overwhelming. The last part that I'll mention is, I know we lost a few people, but just saying, in light of conversations that have been had and will be had, if we were meeting in person, I think this would be a lot easier to work through. And the number of participants that we've had today and the feedback we've got doesn't seem that is unmanageable. But I think just knowing for myself that I'm more likely to ask questions, but also reflect on what others are saying if we're all in the same place, or at least being able to do that in a hybrid fashion. So thank you.
So April, thank you for that. There's a lot there. Marianne, I see you're putting things in the comments. It's helpful for us to understand the various needs that you all have and the best ways to engage. And also, Marianne, I know there's a lot of questions there, and I think we're interested in hearing those so we can make sure that we're addressing them and have conversations about those questions. I think the one thing that I would highlight for folks is that in terms of, and I know this is maybe, Bryn, I don't know if you were going to cover this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it because the timing right now is right. So we are, when we're not yet overtime, so we have the schedule till noon. But in terms of the timing for POP development, I just want to give you all kind of the crystal ball of how it goes, okay? So what you may recall from the budget development process is the first thing that gets locked down is POP numbers and POP titles. And those get locked down in essentially, I think, like the first week of June or somewhere around there. So what you'll see from our process is trying to understand folks' priorities, because the POP numbers, our agency has to put the POP numbers in that reflects the agency's priorities. And okay, sorry, I thought I got booted out for a second there. And so that means that it's really helpful for us to understand what POPs, where your priorities are in terms of these POPs, because then that we can take that and that helps us understand as we develop our prioritization, the thing gets locked down in POP numbers, right? So that's one piece that I'll just ask you all to think about over time here, and that has a a due date for us. The other piece then is, of course, the titles, which I will confess that there has been times where we've had things in a POP, we have we have to nail down the title, they get locked in, and then the POP kind of changes and the title doesn't make as much sense. Sometimes that happens. But those are just two things I bring up because as we develop these, those are some areas that you'll see us start to try to lock down first. And then in terms of the narratives and some of the numbers that are in there, there's a little bit more time for us. Well, there's a lot more time for us to work on the narrative. How do we describe these? What, things you all, I appreciate you all saying that you need to have a good understanding because if you're, of course, going to be advocating for any of these things, you need to have the full perspective. And so what you may recall from our prior processes is we start out with this spreadsheet because we're trying to get this prioritization. I appreciate the feedback that we've gotten on this spreadsheet, and I think there's different ways for us to do that in the future. And so that's why you're starting to see us ask for like, what are your high, mediums, and lows? Is because that's kind of how the process develops over time. But note that we do have more time to continue the conversations because we don't lock down really the descriptions until July. And I think the numbers get locked sometime in June. Lisa Snyder, do you recall when the numbers get locked down? Or Bryn?
We have to have our numbers submitted by June 30th at the latest. And so they'll get locked down early June-ish.
Internally, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So that gives you just a little perspective in terms of what the kind of the decision space that we are in and what we need to work through. So hopefully that is helpful. And I look forward to further conversations on all of these things. Bryn, why don't you keep us moving along on the next items, which I guess maybe is me, huh?
It is.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll be curious to hear from all of you because we've debated a bit internally about the best approach to this. And this really is a funding package that provides us with facilitation dollars. So what we've seen in recent years is that as our issues get more complex, we feel like we would benefit from having professional facilitation. And the one-offs that we get don't allow us to use facilitation dollars, right, for all the issues that we think we could use for facilitation, and also doesn't allow us to plan ahead on what we'll use facilitation, a professional facilitator on and what we won't. Instead, we're kind of locked into whatever the individual appropriation is for facilitation. So you all may recall that we've received funding for facilitation to work with particular basins. We would like to request facilitation funding for our work and engagement in the negotiations with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And we're also, of course, there's this, we've seen it with the Regional Water Management and Planning Work Group, Oregon Consensus Facilitation. As we talk about facilitation for addressing bi-state water issues with other states, that's another area where we could see there being a benefit. And then just more broadly, we could see potentially facilitation funding for as we navigate other policy and complex issues that arise. We've seen these kind of pop up in terms of transfers of stored water, the fee work group. These are all examples. I could see it being beneficial if we had funding to be able to bring in someone, for example, for Division 10 or Division 54, Division 77, for those of you that are familiar with some of the complicated rulemakings that we've engaged in. And then, of course, as we think about having more, this is not currently on the document, but as we think about having more public meetings in regards to study findings, for example, or data, I think those are all areas where we see the benefit. There could be a benefit for having a professional facilitator. Instead of having all these one-off individual requests, we're proposing to roll that all up into just having a base budget line item that would we would be able to tap for hiring professional facilitators. So that's what this request is. Phil.
Hey, thank you, Phil Donovan, again, on behalf of the Confederate Tribes of the Umatilla. And first off, I want to acknowledge that Oregon Water Resources sent a letter requesting consultation with all 9 federally recognized tribes. And so, you know, we've, as most of the participants on this call know, we participated in this process. But I do want to acknowledge how much we appreciate the recognition that, you know, tribal governments are not a traditional stakeholder. And so through those consultation conversations, you know, we've like the direction of this proposal. You know, for the past decade plus, C2IR has been working with local irrigation districts, ranches, state of Oregon, through this federal negotiation team on really complex agreements to satisfy the tribe's water claims and ensure that no one else's water rights are harmed. So, you know, the state's a critical partner in these negotiations, and we think it's really a good idea to have a robust public process so that all citizens of Oregon have an opportunity to understand what goes into a water rights settlement and how it would be implemented. So anyways, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this, and thank you.
Marianne.
Yeah, I think some of these might be follow-up questions. One, just given that you're considering a specific facilitator for the conversations with the Umatilla tribes, how does that relate to the kind of like tribal liaison? I'm presuming that there's different roles they're intending to occupy, but I'm just interested in kind of the role of the liaison in a facilitated conversation versus the role of the facilitator. And then secondly, I just want to correct what I'm thinking I'm hearing. You're thinking this is all external contracted for facilitation, or are you thinking you will hire facilitators to be housed within the department to do various facilitation needs? Or are you thinking this will be like Oregon Solutions or other third-party facilitators that the department will always contract with?
Marianne, thank you for that question. This particular package, we're thinking about it from the standpoint of professional contracted facilitation services. So I don't know, I can't recall, were you on the Beaver ADU, ABD work group that DSL had, for example, and they had brought in a professional facilitator. That was a rulemaking, and they had brought in a professional facilitator.
Yep.
So yeah, and I think other agencies do that, and we have not had. We occasionally have done it, but it's always us scraping up money to do it in the few instances that we have. So I'm seeing this as professional contracted services for facilitation. I'll note that that doesn't mean that we will always use a contractor for facilitation, because we have been trying to increase our staff expertise in this arena. We have, there's the public engagement positions that were funded in the 2021 session. And so there's so much work to be done, though. I guess what I would say in this arena is that those folks aren't going to do every single meeting that we have, for example. So I see it as a complement to have someone that can come in and do that work. I think the other piece to it, and this is a bit of the distinction, is there's a difference between you as if you are a party to a negotiation, being the facilitator and the party, versus just being a party that's a participant and not being the facilitator, right? And so there's some benefit to having somebody that is truly perceived as being the third party neutral, versus having WRD have a staff person that is both there to help negotiate and share the interests of the agency, and then also at the same time attempt to be the third party neutral. So I don't know, does that answer your question, Marianne?
It does. I guess I will say as a follow-up, I can see the need for outside facilitation. And I think there's facilitators with pretty deep expertise in like reserve water rights and things like that would be really useful for the Umatilla kind of negotiations that need to happen. I will say the other examples used of like the DSL rulemaking, I participated somewhat in like the Beaver Dams, Senate Bill 762, the ongoing regional management conversation. I've been really disappointed with the amount of like lack of leadership and facilitated conversations that I've been in, that the state has been part of. And I feel like we end up with way too many meetings and way too little direction on kind of outcome, goals, what's possible, what the universe of what we're supposed to be doing is. So I've kind of soured on outside facilitation within the state just because it has become the biggest time suck that very rarely results in like a groundbreaking product that wasn't, I think we could have gotten there in about half the time. And I will say, I think you're 10 times the facilitator of most of the facilitated processes that I've been in. And so I guess I could just raise a question about the utility of facilitation and kind of the rulemaking policy setting context. I certainly see it in the context of negotiations. And so that's my comment on it. I if we ranked this, I feel like I would rank it lower just because I've been really disappointed in kind of the quality of facilitation I've seen across all of the state processes that I've been part of.
Well, Marianne, I appreciate that perspective. And I think, one of the question marks from my standpoint is if we have the additional, for example, policy staff in regards, and I'm talking about this from the lens of policy, because that's one of the ones you mentioned in rulemakings, having more bandwidth from the policy side allows those folks to run better processes. And so that may actually, in some respects, reduce the need for outside facilitation. So I'm just riffing off of what you said. And I also agree that there are, at least on policy and rulemaking stuff, but I think there are, and to your point, I hope I don't drop off, with like the tribal water rights negotiations. That's definitely, the state has an interest, and I think those ones are definitely, it's beneficial probably to have a third party involved. So maybe there's some, and I think we've also found it for some of the basin work. But it sounds like there's more discussions maybe to be had there. So thank you.
All right. April, I've got your comment logged. Thank you. So we've got 3 more pops to get through. They are all Dwight's. So let's jump to ZD. And Dwight, feel free to take it away.
Okay, thank you. The ZD has two pieces to it. They're both related to funding for ODF and W staff. Remember that WRD funds the ODF and W work that they spend on fish-related technical reviews on water right applications. And the first part of this is related to funding some work that needs to be done on municipal extensions of time. We have about 40 pending extensions of time that need ODF and W fish persistence reviews. The ODF and W has been completing in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 fish persistence reviews per year. So, and that's just really causing a problem for municipalities who need to know sooner if they're going to get their extension and with what limiting conditions they might have because of the fish persistence reviews. There's ODF and W is going to be looking for funding, or not funding, but position authority to hire a position to do that work in the 23-25 biennium, and we would pay for it with about $240,000 for the next biennium. Also related to the same topic, as I mentioned, we pay ODF and W to do the fish-related reviews on applications. That started, I believe, in 2019. We're seeking $230,000 in our base budget for the normal review costs that work has been costing us since about 2019. So in 2025, we want a base budget allocation to fund that work, and just 2 years of funding for the fish persistence work. So that's what ZD is about.
If I can add to Dwight's comment, just some of you may remember this, but this is in response to legislative action that occurred a few years back when the ODFW budget was not doing well, and as a result, the legislature basically directed our agency to cover the costs for ODFW work associated with reviewing our water-related transactions. We didn't get funded for that, so we've had to carve that out of our budget in creative ways in recent years. So this option package would help us provide base budget funding based on the numbers that we're seeing, as Dwight just relayed to you. But I wanted to make sure that folks were you understood that where this came from. Again, many of you, a number of you experienced that, but it is an obligation that we have under the law currently to cover ODFW's costs associated with that work.
Thanks, Tom. Marianne, is that a new hand or an old hand?
It's old. I'm sorry. I'll put it down.
No worries. And I know you're driving, so you got a lot of irons in the fire. All right. Okay, it looks like we're losing folks. So let's, Dwight, let's move to ZE, and we'll quickly move through that one and then finish up with ZF, and then we'll have some closing comments. So go for ZE.
Okay, ZE. This is to fund some positions that are supposed to be funded by scenic waterway money from the Parks Department, Parks and Recreation Department. We're currently only receiving $206,000 per biennium, and that's not enough to protect, to do our scenic waterway reviews on water right applications and transfer files. So this would fully fund that work. You know, while we kind of complain about having to fund the work that ODF&W does for their reviews, I'm sure they are not happy with having to fund our work, but there's no legislative requirement for them to fund all of our work. So they're only funding part of it. We've got a deficit there. This package is to allow us to fund the scenic waterway work with general fund dollars in our base budget.
Thank you, Dwight. Go ahead, excuse me, go ahead, April.
I just want to reiterate the comments that have been made in the chat, that this is just really I know you guys didn't do this particular change nor suggest it, but I would be willing to work with other stakeholders in revisiting this conversation, both with the current speaker, Rep. Rayfield, who I believe was one of the folks that worked on this back when it passed. But I really do think that it is not sensical, nor is it equitable for one natural resources agency to bill others when there's work that goes across all of the agencies. So I think one of the things that might be helpful for you guys to think about is, and not wanting additional work, so it would be stuff that would be easily accessible if any of us were to ask about, for example, what type of reviews do you guys do for Fish and Wildlife that theoretically you could be charging them for in the same way that they're charging you for? And I'm not suggesting that we do that so much as have that as an example of why it really doesn't make sense, and the type of funding they need or that you need for that similar work should be coming out of the general fund in recognition of how all citizens benefit from the work. So it just, I don't have another word other than stupid, but that's what I got. And I think it's something that it would be good to revisit this in the coming session.
Thanks, April. Marianne, it looks like your written comment is along the lines of April's. I've got it logged. Please let me know if you would like to add to that or if you're okay moving on to the next topic.
April said it better than me, so you could just give me a +1 to April's comments and forget my inartful wording.
Great, thanks, Marianne. All right, let's finish up. Let's drop down to ZF, Dwight, and we are almost done, folks.
All right, thank you. Okay, ZF. So we, in the Water Rights Services Division, we were fortunate to receive 2 chunks of funding to work on backlog projects. And this ZF would continue that funding through the 23-25 biennium. The first chunk that the legislature funded was from general fund to work on the protest backlog reduction. So they gave us $2.2 million of general fund, and we hired 2 limited duration staff to work on the protest backlog reduction project. And we're also spending that money with to pay our related bills for the Department of Justice and the Office of Administrative Hearings for some upcoming hearings we're going to have on protested applications. That's going to make a small dent in the protest backlog, but already this biennium we've received about 125 new protests, most of them on in-stream water rights. So while we're increasing the funding, our backlog on protest is growing. Anyway, so that's one piece. The legislature also allocated $3 million of ARPA funding to work on the water right backlogs in certificates, transfers, and water right applications. The final approval of that allocation has not come through from DAS yet, but we are expecting it anytime in the next couple of weeks, and we're gearing up to recruit about 10 staff for that project. The ARPA money funding will go in to the next biennium about 6 months. So we want to extend the funding for 24 months in the next biennium on the protest work, and 18 months for some of the water right and transfer backlog, but not the certificate piece. We don't think we'll need it yet in the 2025 biennium. But anyway, this is all about continuing the funding and the projects on the protest backlog, and continued work to process water right applications and transactions in a timely manner.
All right, not seeing any other hands or comments. Thank you very much for closing us out, Dwight. Okay, I'm gonna stop screen sharing so we can all see each other. So thank you everybody for your thoughtful comments today. I'll just provide a little bit of background on next steps and kind of what we're hoping to get from you all further, and sort of helping us refine this list and cut it down and prioritize. So what I would appreciate is if folks would be able to take the spreadsheet or the Word document, whichever you prefer, that's attached in the meeting invite, and provide a high, medium, low, and ranking on the relevant POCs. You don't need to comment on every single one of them, but the ones that you feel are high, that you feel have a visceral reaction to, high, medium, or low, we ask that you kind of cap your high and medium rankings at 10 apiece, just to sort of help us figure out what's high priority and what's medium priority. There's also an opportunity to provide comment. So if there were comments that you didn't get to share today or that you have later about positions or objectives of each POP, it would be really appreciated if we could get those. I don't know, Raquel, Tom, I don't know if we have a drop dead date that we would like folks to provide that info, but I will provide a couple of forward-looking events for you all to keep in mind. Our next meeting together for a similar meeting like this is charted out for May 17th, and then we've got a special commission meeting at the end of May, so May 31st, to get our commission's feedback on this list in some way, shape, or form. So I presume we will be taking feedback all the way up through then. Raquel, Tom, please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if we have a drop dead date as to when we would like your prioritization by.
What we could do maybe is send out an email to everyone to give you a date. I've not had a chance to talk that through with folks, but my sense is that it would be great to get all of your input to help inform the conversation that we have with the commission, which will be kind of our last public opportunity to get feedback on all of our concepts. And I think that our commissioners would value seeing your feedback and your input. Raquel, did you want to add anything, Raquel?
No, Tom, that's correct. I think we may have put it in the email that was previously sent out, but if we did not, we will make sure to do that. Tom is correct and on point that we do need to get it before we have the commission meeting, because that is one of the purposes of the commission meeting is us talking about our prioritization.
Great. Thank you. And then as always, it's helpful to get this feedback before our next meeting together to sort of help us figure out what requires further conversation, more in-depth conversation with you all. So we'll get a follow-up email out to give you all a deadline. In terms of other things that we would like for you all to be aware of, I want to touch base on the 2 LCs that we've been kind of kicking around together. We had one meeting with the split season leasing subgroup. We got some great feedback there. I want all of you who are involved in that process to know that we're working internally to kind of figure out some next steps, and I'll be sending out a scheduling poll next week to get another meeting set up so we can kind of continue that conversation. So more to come on that. And then the water planning LC, some of you may have seen that we sent out a save the date for a 2-hour workshop on May 10th to discuss both the legislative concept and the related POPs as it relates to water planning at the agency. So the agenda has a registration link. We asked folks to register by close of business on May 5th. And we're hoping to get meeting materials out at some point next week. So folks have ample time to review that before we meet. So with that, we are with 1 minute to spare. That's all we've got today. I really appreciate everyone's thoughtful engagement and comments. It's really helpful as we move forward. So with that, again, thank you. Have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to talking with you all later.
Thanks, everyone.